how they convinced you that Superman 2025 was a hit. First of all, we have to look at the latest big hit in Hollywood, which is the recent release of Wicked for Good, which is the sequel to the adaptation of the Wizard of Oz prequel musical. So they're saying things like this: it's the most successful Broadway adaptation of all time. It's the second greatest box office opening weekend of this year. Well, it hasn't been the greatest year for the Hollywood box office, has it now? Disney's Lilo and Stitch live action movie adaptation is the only movie this year to bring in $1 billion globally. Because we all know when Disney do it right, when Disney are not gaslighting and focusing on identity politics and make a cutesy, kiddie family movie, they bring in the dough. Unfortunately for Disney, most of the other releases they've released have either underwhelmed at the box office or have been actual flops. So Lilo and Stitch making $1 billion is great on its own, but it's not good for the company anyway because they're hemorrhaging money. So, yeah, they're doing this. What they do is they stat pad. What they do is they encourage access media to focus on certain stats to make underwhelming box office openings look bigger than they are. So there, with Wicked for Good, they're saying it's the most successful adapted Broadway musical of all time, which it is. It's brought in 226 million globally on its opening weekend. Now that, my friends, actually isn't all that, and saying it's the second most successful opening weekend isn't great, because at the end of the day, this year has been shit for the US box office, hasn't it? So we go to Superman, which opened in the range of the 220 million range. 220 million range, something like that. Now, they were telling you what a big success this was. They were comparing it to the domestic opening of Man of Steel, and they were comparing it to Superman 78. Superman 78, if you translate for inflation, actually made over $1 billion in today's money. But what you've got to understand is that Superman 78 opened up to less screens. There was no IMAX screens, there was no 3D screens, there was no sensory screens, there was just basic SD screens. There wasn't that many movie theaters around in comparison to today. Superman 78 for the time was a huge hit, probably one of Warner Brothers' biggest hits of all time back in 1978, but they stat padded in comparison for a movie that opened up, nearly 60 years ago, or whatever it fucking is, 54 years ago, whatever it is, right, that opened up to fewer cinemas. And is it right, really, to compare Superman 2025 to Man of Steel? Man of Steel opened up to 668 million. So it wasn't one of the biggest hits ever, either. So is it fair to compare it with that anyway? But Man of Steel's total box office is still higher than James Gunn's Superman 2025. And if you compare it for ticket, Man of Steel sold more tickets. But Man of Steel didn't do great domestically. Man of Steel did better internationally than it did domestically. Now, Superman 2025 flopped internationally, but did okay domestically. But here, if you're naive, right? If you're naive, you fall for all this, like the Wicked for Good box office. It's the best Broadway musical adaptation ever. It's the most successful Broadway adaptation musical ever. If you're naive and you don't understand how box office works, you think that's actually good. They're only saying that because they're not overly impressed with the opening, and they're probably going to have a huge drop-off in the second weekend, as most movies today do. A Superman movie should actually be opening to 500 million at the very least. 500 million. It should be a Force Awakens box office. It should be a Deadpool and Wolverine. It should be a Spider-Man No Way Home opening. Think back to all the peak MCU standalone movies that opened up higher than Superman did. So Superman opening in the 220 million range isn't that impressive, isn't that good, but what they were doing is they were comparing it to other movies that maybe didn't do so well. And this is what they do. And this is what you call stat padding. Comparing it to box offices that weren't that great, so it sounds good. So they were calling Superman a smash hit. Because it doesn't really matter how well a film has done this year in comparison to other films released this year, because it hasn't been a great year for the American box office. So that's a nonsense. What they don't do is compare it to other box offices from other years that were huge. You know, Hollywood about 10, 15, 20 years ago was having huge years. It was thriving. It's not thriving anymore. So saying that Wicked for Good is the second most successful movie in the box offices in terms of opening weekends of this year isn't really saying very much. Putting Superman up there as one of the biggest hits of this year doesn't say very much. Superman completed its box office with 616 million. Every week they were stat padding. You know, they were giving these stats, and you know, they're not lying. This is not what they're doing. They're not necessarily lying about the box office, even though I'm not convinced that Superman truly brought in 616 million. What they're doing is they're stat padding. They're comparing the film they want you to think a film is so huge and so successful. And what they normally do is they get in all these stats in the opening weekend because they know in the second weekend it's going to drop off so high. Now, I think that Superman 2025 actually didn't have the worst drop-off domestically, but again, internationally, it actually had a huge drop-off. International audiences who are more sophisticated than domestic audiences rejected Superman 2025. Simple as that. So they just kept on comparing it to moderate income movies to make the box office for Superman seem better than it actually was. And they do this with all movies. This is the funniest fucking one I saw on Instagram from Collider, one of the worst movie sites you'll fucking find. They were saying that Edgar Wright's Running Man, The Running Man, has already collected all the box office that the original Running Man, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, made in its entire run. What a desperate fucking stat. And this, my friends, is what they do. And this is why I'm making this video today. It's very important that you understand what they're fucking doing. Because Hollywood are on their knees. They're not bringing in the money the studios want. And the studios never learn their fucking lesson. They keep on making bad movies by people who are either too lazy to make great movies or aren't able to make great movies. Now, Edgar Wright is a really good writer-director. But when you watch The Running Man, the one that he's made, the modern version, the retelling, it doesn't even feel like an Edgar Wright film. That's interesting, isn't it? Maybe a video for another time. So they release these bad movies or these middle-of-the-road movies, and then instead of admitting how badly they've done, because they can never admit the fucking truth, they stat pad their movies to look like bigger hits than they actually are. And all the influencers, all the high-profile YouTubers will not expose these box offices. Some of them do, but the shills won't. I don't remember Boba Talks being honest about the box office, right? He's too busy talking about Easter eggs and stuff. Because if you talk about Easter eggs, you don't have to admit you're talking about a shite movie. You can just talk about, oh yeah, what about this, what about that? So this is what New Hollywood do. They sell you fraudulent stats. And this is what they were doing with Superman. Oh yeah, domestically it did great. It brought in another amount of money this week. But what they won't tell you is the truth. That anyone making a Superman movie should be opening up to around 500 million. You know, you should be. You should be opening up to 500 million. You should be hoping to be bringing home over $1 billion for a Superman movie. You should. And Man of Steel failed to bring in that money as well, because as I said before, it had too many big swings, and it was contemporary. I love Man of Steel, but I'm an honest guy. You know, I should start renaming all my social media platforms the Straight Talker, because that's what I fucking am. No matter if I love something or hate something, I'll always be honest about the box office. Man of Steel, potentially, was so good, it should have brought in more money. But people have this expectation of a Superman film to be like the Dick Donner movie, and that's the problem. And when you've got Access Media pushing that as well, it becomes a bigger problem. What happened when Superman was released? People like Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, who didn't like Man of Steel, started to realise, fucking hell, come back, Zack Snyder, all isn't forgiven. Because this James Gunn Superman movie is utter shite. I didn't realise he was going to make such a shite movie. Well, I did. But the innocents out there actually thought they were going to get another Dick Donner movie. They didn't even get that. Because you can do a paint-by-numbers Dick Donner, bright and inspirational Superman movie. You can do that, but they can't even do that fucking properly. James Gunn couldn't even do that properly. So today I've taught you to look out for certain things on the opening box office. Access Media will find stats. It's the biggest selling film of this type ever, but analyse that. Analyse how Wicked for Good is the most successful Broadway adaptation ever. Think about past Broadway adaptations when they were released. How many movie screens was there when they were released, right? Think about it. This is what they do. And this is what they did with Superman. They were comparing it to other films, but they didn't dare compare it to the peak MCU standalone origin movie. Box office, opening box offices, complete box offices. All they do is compare it to stuff that didn't do maybe as well. So you compare it to Man of Steel domestically. Man of Steel didn't do great domestically. So Superman had a solid box office domestically. There's no denying that. But again, a Superman movie should be opening up and having a complete box office of over $1 billion to $2 billion. That's the fucking truth. And James Gunn's Superman didn't do that. James Gunn's Superman wasn't a success. It cost around $225 million to make. Then there's the $130+ million marketing budget they use. Because as I said before, the worse the movie, the more you have to spend on marketing to spin the narrative that you're going to see a great movie. We didn't see a great movie. We saw the worst Superman film ever made. And the box office, no matter how they spun it, wasn't great. It was terrible. So these are things for all of you to look out for when they're talking about box office. Because if a film makes tremendous box office, you don't have to stat pad. You don't have to compare it to moderate box office events. I don't remember them having to stat pad Deadpool and Wolverine or Titanic or the great movies that made a lot of money. And here's the thing, this is what they do today. Because Access Media and the studios can't accept that they're doing things wrong, that they're making bad things by people who either can't make great movies or refuse to make great movies. When you're gaslighting your own customer, when you refuse to admit you work in a consumer-based industry, this, my friends, is what happens. You have to lie about the income of the movie. Not necessarily lie, but let's say you put some broccoli. You put some broccoli to make it look nice, to make the meal look fuller than it actually is. And you compare the box office to the movies that haven't done so well to moderately box office movies. It's the oldest fucking trick in the book. I've never seen an era like it. Access Media are not here to inform you. They're not respectable, good journalists. Access Media are part of the Hollywood entertainment machine themselves.